The wind whispered across the dry plains, carrying a chill that seemed too sharp for late summer. Eliza Warren trudged along the familiar path toward her homestead, each step heavier than the last. Months of tending to her ailing parents had left her bones tired, but hope had kept her moving, hope that the fever had spared them. Yet as she crested the small ridge that gave her the first view of the valley, her stomach twisted in sudden, unbearable dread. The house that had once echoed with her father's laughter and her mother's gentle humming now stood silent, its windows staring like empty eyes. Smoke still curled faintly from the chimney, but it was thin and lifeless. The garden, once a riot of color, had wilted under the sun, untended. And then she saw them, the bodies lying side by side on the floor, pale and unresponsive, as though the fever had stolen not only their lives but the very warmth of the home. Eliza's knees buckled. Her hands flew to her mouth, trying to stifle a scream that would not come. She had spent so long imagining returning to them, imagining their smiles, imagining the relief of seeing them survive. But the world she had known, the family, the laughter, the simple rhythm of her small life was gone. Only silence remained. For a long moment she simply sat on the threshold, the late afternoon sun falling across her tear-streaked face. Her grief was a weight she had never carried before, pressing down, suffocating yet oddly clarifying. She realized painfully that the past could not hold her, not anymore. She had no choice but to leave. She wandered out into the valley, letting the wind guide her feet. Her mind drifted to the whispers she had heard in town, rumors of Sagebrush Hollow, a cluster of cabins and a ranch on the edge of the hills. They said children wandered there, lost and hungry, some without parents at all. Eliza's heart ached at the thought. She knew the loneliness of loss better than anyone. Perhaps, she thought, there she could do something. Perhaps there she could find a reason to keep moving forward. The trail grew rougher, dust clinging to her boots as she passed dry creeks and skeletal trees. She tried to hold on to the memory of her parents, of their soft words, their insistence that kindness was never wasted. Every step felt heavier, as if the earth itself mourned with her. But still, she kept walking. By late afternoon, the horizon split open to reveal Sagebrush Hollow. Smoke rose from several chimneys curling into the blue sky, and for the first time in days, Eliza felt a flicker of something that resembled hope. She approached cautiously, noting the quiet bustle of the small community. Children ran barefoot along dirt paths, chasing one another with wild laughter that made her chest ache in longing. She watched them from the ridge, feeling a strange combination of fear and desire. The fear of intrusion, the desire to belong somewhere again, to protect these small lives as hers had been taken from her. And then she saw him. Caleb Trask, a broad-shouldered man with hands calloused by years of work, kneeling in the back pasture with his head bowed, digging slowly, deliberately. Beside him, two freshly turned mounds of earth caught the sun, his wife and young son gone in an instant. The sight struck her like a physical blow, a mirror of her own grief reflected across another human being. She could see the same loneliness in him, the same raw, silent despair. Eliza stayed hidden at the edge of the field, her fingers clutching the strap of her worn satchel. She had no plan, no words that could bridge the gulf of sorrow between them. Yet even from a distance, she felt the pull of responsibility, the stirrings of something that might, one day, become hope. Perhaps grief, she realized, could be a bond. Perhaps it could be the first step towards something more than mere survival. As the sun dipped low, painting the hollow in shades of gold and amber, she made her choice. She would not turn away. She would step forward into a world she had never truly known, to find somehow a family forged by loss, by courage, by the quiet insistence of care. And perhaps, just perhaps, she would find a way to heal the wounds death had left behind. Eliza waited until the sun had slipped below the horizon before moving closer to the ranch. The air was cool now, carrying the scent of hay and dust, of earth freshly turned and wood smoldering faintly in a distant hearth. She crept along the edge of the property, unsure whether her presence would be welcomed or feared. The grief in her chest had sharpened her senses, every rustle of leaves and creak of a board making her pulse quicken. She found the main cabin door closed, but the flicker of lantern light through the window betrayed life within. Caleb Trask was there, she realized, though not moving freely. He remained at the back of the property, digging slowly by the twin graves, his movements rigid with exhaustion and sorrow. Eliza could feel the heaviness of his grief, a weight that mirrored her own. It was raw and unpolished, but strangely familiar. The first evening passed in silence. She observed the ranch, noting the chores left undone. The water troughs needed cleaning. The barn was half repaired and the fields were overgrown. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, but she forced herself to keep walking, hoping to find a safe place to rest. As she wandered near the creek that ran along the edge of the property, she noticed movement, small shadows flitting between rocks and reeds. A group of children, no older than 10, crouched low, scavenging what they could from the stream's edge. Their clothes were tattered, their faces smudged with dirt, but their eyes glimmered with a wary intelligence. They froze when they saw her, suspicion flashing across their features, and for a moment she understood their fear. She had been alone for days herself, wandering through a valley emptied by death and disease. She approached slowly, crouching to meet their gaze. I don't mean any harm, she said softly. Do you want some bread? Her voice trembled, betraying the vulnerability she carried, yet there was something in it that drew the children closer. One of them, a boy no older than 7, stepped forward hesitantly. Eliza reached into her satchel and produced a small loaf she had carried since leaving her home, handing it to him. The boy's eyes widened, a spark of trust igniting. Soon the other children gathered around, sharing what little she had brought. That night she returned to the cabin, her mind racing. She had seen enough to know that these children were alone, that the world outside would not protect them, and yet inside her a determination was growing, an urgent need to act. If she could not save her own family, perhaps she could save others. The next morning she approached Caleb directly, careful not to startle him. He was tending to the stables, moving with mechanical precision, yet when he looked up his eyes were sharp, assessing. I saw the children near the creek, Eliza said. Her voice was steady now, bolstered by resolve. They have nowhere to go. They're hungry. I can help them. Caleb's brow furrowed. He was a man shaped by loss, and grief had hardened him. They're trouble, he said, his voice low and gravelly. You can't just feed strangers. You'll bring danger to this place. I've lost everything, she replied, meeting his gaze with quiet fire. So have you. But that doesn't mean we have to stand by while others suffer. We can choose differently. We can give. He said nothing, and for a long moment, the two of them simply stared at one another. Grief mirrored in the other's eyes, suspicion and hope locked in delicate balance. Finally, he turned back to his chores, muttering, Do what you want, but keep them away from the house. Eliza nodded, understanding the boundaries he had set, yet also feeling the first stirrings of purpose. That evening she returned to the creek, gathering the children and offering them warmth, food, and kindness. She listened as they told her fragments of their lives, families lost, homes abandoned, dreams crushed by circumstance, and in their eyes she saw echoes of her own sorrow, but also the faintest glimmer of trust and hope. By the fire, she made a silent vow. She would not leave them. She would not let the same emptiness that had consumed her destroy these children. Alone, she had wandered into Sagebrush Hollow seeking solace. But she now realized her path was clear. She would become the family they needed, a guardian against the cruel indifference of the world. And for the first time since the fever took her parents, Eliza felt the faint stirrings of hope. The next morning, the sun rose over Sagebrush Hollow in muted gold, painting the hills in long shadows. Eliza moved quietly around the ranch, preparing breakfast for the children she had taken under her wing. She had learned their names overnight: Maggie, little Thomas, and the twins, Anna and Ruthie. Their faces, streaked with grime and fear, brightened at the sight of her, as if her very presence offered a fragile safety. For the first time in weeks, she felt needed, alive in a way she hadn't since the fever had claimed her family. Caleb emerged from the cabin just as she was handing a piece of bread to Maggie. His broad frame blocked the rising sun, casting a long shadow across the yard. His gaze fell upon her and the children, narrowing slightly. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice low and wary. "Feeding them," she replied simply, meeting his eyes. "They're hungry." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You're inviting trouble," he said bluntly, stepping closer. "This isn't a place for lost souls to wander. The world outside is harsh enough without you drawing attention here." Eliza's heart pounded, but she refused to retreat. She had come too far, carried too much grief to be cowed by fear or suspicion. "Caleb," she said softly, "look at us. We've both lost everything we loved, but that doesn't mean we stop caring. It doesn't mean we leave these children to fend for themselves. We can choose to give instead of letting despair take hold." For a moment he said nothing, simply studying her. The wind stirred dust across the pasture, and the children, sensing tension, huddled closer to Eliza. Caleb's eyes flicked to them, then back to her, and something in his stern exterior faltered, a crack in the armor of his grief. "You don't understand," he finally muttered. "I've lost my family. I can't risk more." "I understand more than you think," Eliza whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've walked through the valley of death, Caleb. I've felt the hollow that comes when love is ripped away. But I've also learned that care can be stronger than fear. These children," she gestured to them, "they need us. And I can't turn away." Caleb's gaze lingered on her, and for the first time, he saw not a stranger but someone shaped by the same grief, someone who carried it not as a chain but as a purpose. Slowly, he exhaled, his broad shoulders sagging slightly, as though the weight of his sorrow pressed upon him in new ways. "Fine," he said finally, the word rough, uneven, and reluctant. "You can look after them. But under my roof, you do things my way and you don't bring them into trouble." Eliza's lips curved into a tentative smile. "I promise," she said. "I'll protect them, Caleb. I won't let anything happen to them." The children watched the exchange, unsure, but hope flickered in their wide eyes. Maggie took Eliza's hand and the others edged closer, the warmth of belonging beginning to replace the cold sting of abandonment. For the next days, Eliza settled into her role, learning the rhythms of the ranch and of Caleb's life. She fed the children, tended the small garden, and helped mend fences and barns alongside him, slowly earning his grudging trust. Each small task was a victory not just for survival, but for the fragile bond forming between them, a bond built on shared grief and a mutual desire to nurture life despite its losses. One evening, after the children had been tucked into the hayloft, Caleb approached her quietly. The sky was painted in bruised purples and golds, and the scent of evening fire hung in the air. "You've got guts," he admitted gruffly, "and stubbornness. And maybe I was wrong about you." Eliza looked at him, sensing the small, rare opening in his defenses. "We're not so different," she said. "We both know what it's like to lose everything, but we can still build something that matters." Caleb's eyes softened, the first genuine warmth breaking through his stoicism. "Then we'll see if you're right," he said, "for their sake and ours." And so a fragile truce was formed, not just between Eliza and Caleb, but between grief and hope, between loss and the first tentative steps toward healing. For the first time since she had left her homestead, Eliza felt the stirrings of purpose and the faint, thrilling notion that even broken people could choose to create family from the fragments of their pasts. Days bled into weeks at the Trask Ranch, and slowly, life began to settle into a rhythm that neither Eliza nor Caleb had expected. The barn, once sagging and crumbling, now boasted fresh timbers and a repaired roof. Fences were mended. The small garden had begun to thrive, and for the first time, the laughter of children echoed across the fields. Maggie and the others ran freely, their voices carrying a lightness that had long been absent from the valley. Eliza moved among them with a quiet grace, feeding, guiding, and comforting. She was no longer just a grieving wanderer. She had become a pillar, a steady presence in a world that had seemed relentlessly cruel. Caleb, too, found himself drawn into the routines, sharing chores and small victories, his stoicism slowly softening under the warmth of her compassion. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the barn, hammering nails into new boards, Caleb paused and watched her. The sunlight streamed through the cracks, catching the dust in golden shafts, illuminating the lines of grief still etched into her face, softened now by determination. "You've done more than I thought possible," he said quietly, his voice rough but sincere. "I didn't think anyone could bring life back to this place." Eliza met his gaze, a flicker of acknowledgement passing between them. "It's not just me," she replied. "It's us. And them," she added, nodding toward the children who were busy chasing each other around the yard. "We can't undo the past, Caleb, but we can build something new." For a moment they shared silence, the kind that spoke more than words. And in that quiet, a subtle bond formed, one forged not just by grief but by mutual care, by the recognition that they were no longer alone in their suffering. Then came the warning. One evening, a traveling preacher arrived, his coat tattered and eyes sharp beneath the brim of a wide hat. He moved slowly through the yard, observing the children playing, the repaired barns, and finally, Caleb and Eliza tending the garden. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that sent a chill through the air. "You've done well here," he said, looking at the ranch with a mixture of admiration and concern. "But the fever, it has not finished with this valley. Families will flee and the sickness will return. It is dangerous to keep children here. You must consider leaving them behind for their safety." Eliza's heart sank. She had anticipated this possibility, but hearing it spoken aloud made it painfully real. Her gaze fell to the children, whose laughter was now tinged with the fragile innocence of a world that could be snatched away at any moment. "I can't," she said firmly. "I won't abandon them." Caleb's face darkened, a storm behind his eyes. "She's right," he said slowly, almost to himself. "But you're risking everything. If the fever comes back—" His words faltered, unspoken fears hanging heavy in the dusk. That night, Eliza lay awake on the floor of the barn, listening to the soft breathing of the children. Her thoughts circled the preacher's warning, the uncertainty of the future, the dangers that lingered like a shadow over the valley. And yet, amid the fear, a fierce resolve took root. She had already lost everything she loved once, her parents, her home, and she could not turn away from those who still needed her. The next morning, she approached Caleb with a steadiness she did not entirely feel. "We can face it together," she said. "We don't have to let fear dictate our choices. We've built something worth protecting, and I'll fight for it." Caleb looked at her, seeing not just grief and stubbornness, but courage. The wind rustled the newly repaired barn boards, carrying the voices of children playing, and something shifted in him. He nodded, a silent agreement, a recognition that their bond and their makeshift family was stronger than the fear of what might come. The mid-season of their lives at the ranch had arrived. They had built more than barns and fences. They had constructed a fragile haven, a space where loss could coexist with hope, where grief could be softened by care. And though the threat of the fever lingered on the horizon, both of them knew that for the first time in months, perhaps even years, they were no longer wandering through the world alone. The fever returned like a shadow over Sagebrush Hollow, sudden and merciless. Word spread quickly through the small town, families fleeing in every direction, leaving behind the faint echo of hurried footsteps in abandoned homes. The once bright streets were quiet, filled with the hollow wind that rattled shutters and whispered of unseen danger. Eliza woke before dawn to the sound of coughing from the barn loft. She hurried upstairs, heart pounding, and found Thomas doubled over, fever burning his small body. Panic clawed at her chest. She had seen this before. She knew how quickly it could claim life, but she forced herself to stay calm, gently lifting him and wrapping him in blankets. The other children watched, eyes wide with fear, and she knelt among them, whispering reassurances she hoped she could keep. Caleb emerged from the cabin as the first light touched the horizon, his expression grim. He looked at Thomas, at the children gathered in anxious clusters, and the tension in his shoulders betrayed a fear he seldom admitted. "We can't keep them here," he said, voice low but firm. "The fever will take them, just as it's taken others. We should leave. Take only what we can carry." Eliza shook her head, holding Thomas closer. "I won't abandon them," she said, voice trembling but resolute. "I've lost my family, Caleb, but I will not lose these children too. We can't hide from this. We have to protect them." Caleb's eyes narrowed. He had been shaped by grief, hardened by the loss of his wife and son, and the memory of helplessness gnawed at him. "It's too dangerous," he said, stepping back. "You don't understand. This isn't just illness. It's death knocking at the door. I do understand." Eliza snapped, startling even herself with the force of her words. "I've watched death take everything I loved, but I'm not powerless anymore. These children need us, and if we run, we'll be running from ourselves as well, from what we've built." For a tense moment, the barn was silent except for Thomas's shallow breathing and the distant whistle of wind through the trees. Caleb looked around at the children, at Eliza holding them tightly, and felt the stirrings of something he had thought long buried: duty, compassion, and a stubborn spark of hope. "We face it together," he said finally, his voice rough but unwavering. "If we stay, we do it as one. No one gets left behind. Not tonight, not ever." Eliza exhaled, relief and determination mingling, and nodded. She moved quickly, gathering water, medicine, and blankets while Caleb secured the barn, preparing for the outbreak that had come to the town. Together they worked seamlessly, each action deliberate, practiced and fueled by a newfound unity. Outside, the wind carried news of families who had fled, homes abandoned, and sickness spreading like wildfire. Inside the barn, Eliza and Caleb became the calm center amid chaos, tending to the children with tireless devotion. Each fevered brow they wiped, each shivering hand they held, forged a bond deeper than words could capture, a family built not by blood, but by choice, courage, and love. Arguments flared briefly, fear clawing at Caleb, frustration pushing at Eliza, but neither wavered from their decision. They shared quiet glances over the children's heads, acknowledging the unspoken truth. They had chosen each other, and these children over fear. By nightfall, the barn hummed with the low, steady rhythm of care. Children huddled together, wrapped in blankets, their small coughs met with gentle hands and whispered reassurances. Caleb sat near the door, scanning the dark horizon, but his eyes softened when they met Eliza's. She smiled, exhausted but unyielding, and in that smile, he found affirmation. Their family, fragile yet unbreakable, would endure. The second turning point had arrived, not just a test of survival, but a test of courage, love, and the resolve to protect what mattered most. The fever had returned, yes, but so had the strength to fight it together. The days that followed were a blur of worry, sweat, and whispered prayers. Thomas's fever climbed and fell like a storm tide, and Eliza hardly slept, hovering over him and the other children, checking their breathing, fanning their flushed faces, murmuring comfort in soft, steady tones. Caleb moved beside her, hauling buckets of water, chopping firewood, and repairing broken beds, his gruffness softened by the urgency of care. Word of the outbreak spread quickly, and with it came suspicion. Neighbors peered through fences, muttering behind closed doors. Rumors swirled, carried on the wind like poisonous seeds. The children were sick because of the stranger woman. Some whispered that Eliza had brought the fever with her from the valley. Others claimed she was foolish to shelter them at all. One morning, as Eliza cradled Thomas in her arms, a group of townsfolk arrived at the ranch gate. Their eyes were sharp, their voices harsh. "You shouldn't be keeping them here," one woman shouted, her hands trembling with fear. "The fever, don't you see what you've done? You've brought it right into the hollow." Eliza's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. "I'm not leaving them," she said firmly, looking from one frightened face to another. "I lost my family once. I will not let these children suffer the same fate. They need care, not fear," the townsfolk murmured, some shaking their heads, others staring with distrust. Eliza's courage, though, was met with more than words. A man stepped forward, shaking his fists. "You're asking for trouble, girl. You're risking all our lives." Caleb stepped between Eliza and the crowd, his presence immense and commanding. His voice, low and dangerous, carried across the yard. "Back off. These children are under my protection. If you want to point fingers, you'll do it over my body. They stay." End of story. The crowd hesitated, taken aback by Caleb's sudden ferocity. Some whispered apologies, others muttered curses under their breath, but none dared press further. The standoff ended with grudging respect, and the townsfolk retreated, leaving Caleb and Eliza standing together at the gate. Inside the barn, the crisis continued. Thomas's fever spiked higher, and even the smallest children began to show signs of illness. Eliza refused to leave their side, moving from one bed to the next with unyielding determination. She washed their faces, adjusted blankets, and held trembling hands in hers. Each shiver, each cough was a battle she refused to surrender. Caleb watched her, his own exhaustion evident, yet he never faltered in his support. He brought medicines, chopped firewood, and whispered quiet reassurances, his stoic exterior cracking in small ways as he witnessed her relentless compassion. Slowly, day by day, the children began to stabilize. Thomas's fever broke, and the others followed, each small victory lifting the weight from their shoulders. When the first faint smiles returned to the children's faces, Eliza exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She leaned against Caleb, too tired to speak, and he placed a steady hand on her shoulder. No words were needed. The barn hummed with the quiet triumph of survival, of resilience, of a family that had been forged through hardship. The crisis had tested them, pitted them against fear, rumor, and disease, yet in the end, it had also proven something vital. Love and commitment could withstand more than grief alone. They had stared the darkness in the face, and rather than shattering, their bond had strengthened, solidifying a chosen family that could weather the fiercest storms. By nightfall, the barn was quiet but alive. Children slept with blankets tucked around them, murmuring soft dreams, and Eliza finally allowed herself to sit, to breathe, to acknowledge the enormity of what had passed. Caleb joined her, and for the first time, they shared a moment not defined by grief or duty, but by relief and a fragile yet undeniable hope. The storm had not passed entirely. Fear still lingered on the edges of Sagebrush Hollow, but the worst was behind them. For now, and in that stillness, they understood the truth they had built together. A family is not always given by blood, but by choice, courage, and care. The barn had become a fortress of care, a haven of light against the shadow of the fever sweeping Sagebrush Hollow. Each day Eliza and Caleb rose before dawn, tending to the children with unwavering devotion. Their hands were raw from scrubbing, their clothes stained with sweat and medicine, yet neither flinched from the work that demanded every ounce of their strength. Outside, the town watched with a mixture of skepticism and awe. The rumors that once whispered of danger and recklessness had grown into stories of determination and courage. Word traveled slowly, but as neighbors observed Caleb and Eliza moving tirelessly from bed to bed, offering water, tending fevers, and comforting terrified children, the whispered doubts began to shift into admiration. The day that marked the climax came with a storm that rattled the barn doors and sent the wind whistling through the hollow. A new wave of sickness hit the children, each cough and shiver testing the limits of Eliza's resolve. She refused to sleep kneeling beside Maggie, murmuring comfort while Caleb moved quickly between the children, checking temperatures, fetching water, and keeping the barn fire burning steadily against the chill. One by one, the townsfolk approached, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and fear. They hesitated at the barn gate, watching the two adults move with precision, care, and a quiet authority that demanded attention. Some whispered to each other, unsure whether to intervene, while others began to understand what they were witnessing. This was not recklessness. It was courage in its purest form. "You've done more than anyone could have expected," said one elderly woman, voice trembling as she watched Eliza cradle a shivering child. I didn't believe it could be done." Eliza looked up, exhaustion lining her features, but her eyes shone with unwavering determination. "These children are alive because we refused to give up," she said. "Because we chose to care." Caleb, standing beside her, caught her gaze. For the first time, he allowed a small, genuine smile to break through his stoic exterior. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and in that simple gesture, recognition and gratitude passed between them. He had seen her strength, her relentless courage, and realized what he had suspected for weeks. Their bond was more than necessity. It was family forged in fire and sorrow. The storm raged on, but inside the barn, life began to reclaim its rhythm. The children's fevers slowly subsided, their small coughs replaced by tentative laughter and whispered thanks. Caleb and Eliza moved through the loft and down the aisles, checking blankets, offering water, and sharing quiet words of encouragement. Each smile they received, each hand held in gratitude, reinforced what they already knew. They had not only saved these children, but had built a family capable of enduring any hardship. By evening, the storm had passed, leaving a crisp, clear sky above Sagebrush Hollow. The barn was alive with the quiet hum of recovery. The children played softly in the hayloft, their laughter cautious but real, while Eliza and Caleb stood together in the doorway, watching them with tired but proud eyes. "I never thought I'd see the day when I'd be grateful for the chaos of life," Caleb murmured, voice low but steady. "But here with them, with you, I see it. We built something stronger than what we lost." Eliza nodded, a warmth spreading through her chest. "We did," she agreed. "And we'll keep building. Together." Outside, the first stars of the evening twinkled against the fading light, and for the first time since the fever claimed her family, Eliza felt a profound sense of belonging. She was no longer alone. They were no longer alone. What they had created through pain, resilience, and unwavering care stood as proof that love could restore life even when death had taken everything. The town, now witnessing the transformation of fear into respect and awe, began to understand that family was not only a matter of blood, but of choice, courage, and commitment. And in the quiet of the barn, with the children safe and healing, Eliza and Caleb knew without doubt that they had faced the storm and emerged unbroken, together. Months had passed since the fever had swept through Sagebrush Hollow. The ranch, once silent and forlorn, now thrived with life, laughter, and purpose. The barns echoed with the sounds of children's footsteps, the clatter of hooves on the corral, and the rhythmic creak of mending fences. The air was no longer heavy with grief, but alive with the warmth of belonging and the steady pulse of daily work. Eliza moved among the children with practiced ease, her hands steady as she braided hair, washed small faces, and tended to scraped knees. Maggie's laughter rang through the barn. Thomas chased the twins through the yard, and Anna and Ruthie sang quietly as they worked in the small garden. Each moment was a testament to resilience, a living proof that love and care could rebuild what loss had attempted to take. Caleb watched from the porch, leaning against the railing as the sunlight spilled across the ranch. He had changed too. His shoulders no longer carried the same weight of relentless grief, his eyes softer, his stern voice now often punctuated by laughter and encouragement. The bond he shared with Eliza had deepened beyond necessity into something unspoken yet unbreakable. A chosen family forged from shared loss and newfound hope. Eliza approached him with a quiet smile, wiping her hands on her skirt. "The children want to show you something," she said. Caleb raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering across his face. He followed her into the yard where the children had gathered, holding bundles of freshly harvested vegetables, a small loaf of bread, and a few handcrafted toys. Their smiles were wide, their eyes bright. "We wanted to thank you," Thomas said, stepping forward, "for everything, for keeping us safe, for helping us feel happy again." Caleb's stern facade softened completely and he ruffled Thomas's hair, a small laugh escaping his lips. "You've done well yourselves," he said. "Look at what you've accomplished." Eliza watched the exchange, her heart swelling with quiet pride. She had feared for these children, for this fragile family they had built. But now she could see the fruits of their labor, resilience, trust, and love that would endure beyond the hardships of the past. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the valley in hues of amber and gold, Caleb and Eliza stood side by side on the porch, observing the thriving ranch and the joyful commotion of the children. Silence fell between them, a comfortable quiet that spoke louder than any words. "I never thought I'd see this day," Caleb murmured, voice low, almost lost in the wind. "A place filled with life again, laughter again. A family. You made it possible," Eliza replied softly, her hand brushing against his. "We did it together. We chose to keep going, to care, to love, even when it seemed impossible." He nodded, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. The sun dipped lower, the shadows stretching across the fields, and for the first time in years there was no ache of loss, only the steady warmth of what they had built. The children ran past them, shouting and laughing, their voices carrying into the valley, a living testament to endurance and hope. The ranch no longer bore the marks of death and grief, but stood vibrant, strong and full of promise. Each garden patch, each repaired fence, each playful shout was a story of survival, courage, and the bonds of a family chosen by heart rather than blood. Eliza and Caleb remained on the porch, side by side, their hands intertwined as the sky deepened into twilight. They watched the children scatter through the yard, the sound of their laughter mingling with the whispering wind. And in that moment, they both understood a profound truth. Love and care could restore what death had tried to take, and family, true family, was defined not by circumstance, but by choice. As the first stars began to appear in the clear night sky, the ranch stood as a beacon of hope in Sagebrush Hollow, a testament to resilience, redemption, and the quiet power of human connection. Eliza's heart, once hollow with grief, now beat with warmth and purpose, and Caleb's eyes, once shadowed with sorrow, reflected a future full of promise. Together they had survived the darkness, and together they had created a life worth living, a chosen family, unbroken and unafraid. And so, under the glowing sunset and the first gentle shimmer of stars, the Trask Ranch became more than a place. It became a home, alive with laughter, love, and the enduring spirit of those who refused to give up. If you felt the heart of this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a tale of courage, love, and hope from the Wild West.